All right, good morning. Let's open your Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll get into the text this morning. If you didn't pick up a sheet in the back, you will have a little introduction and a text for this morning. We've already done a setup, for the most part, with Ecclesiastes a couple of weeks ago. So we will move to the last part of the introduction and getting ready for the book, and then we'll get into the prologue of Ecclesiastes. So we talked a lot about the word vanity. That word, anybody remember, in fact, what that word really means in the Hebrew? Most translations use vanity. NIV really blows it to smithereens and translates what does it translate? Anybody got any NIV? Worthlessness or meaningless? Meaningless. That is, you couldn't be further off from the Hebrew with meaningless. That is really off. Yeah. Yes, it has the idea of something temporary and transitory. Now, if you're just looking at the Hebrew, though, and you just said, what is really that word? It would be breath. Breath, vapor, right. It would just be breath, vapor, and which implies temporary, right? Yeah, so something that just appears. It is very much like James chapter 4, verse 13 and following. What is your life? It is but a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. That's a great summation. Pardon?
Is that the same word?
It's not the same. No, it wouldn't be the same word, but it is a synonym of the word.
Okay.
Yeah, still essentially the same. So when you think about the preacher starting out by just saying vanity of vanities, which is, remember, that's a superlative to say it twice. It only does it twice in the book, beginning the book, end of the book. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity, and he's just suggesting here that everything that man does on earth under the sun is just a breath. It appears and it's gone. You go back to Isaiah chapter 40, and what would he say about our life? It is like the grass of the field and the flower. It appears today and gone tomorrow. There you are. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody on earth knows that if they never read the Bible? Life comes and life goes. And they don't do a blooming thing about it to get themselves ready or to do something other than what becomes, here it is, and now it's gone. And so that's really what the preacher is trying to get across. This is not life right now. This is not life if you're living it as if you are under the sun. And we still got to talk about that part of it still. So, as I mentioned here in this first point, contrary to some, the preacher is not depressed. He doesn't need Prozac. He's not being negative. He is giving us reality. He is telling us this is where life is real. Come to grips with it. His first 6 chapters, he's going to spend his time illustrating how life is a breath. Appears, vanishes, and there's no gain under the sun. So that's what he's going to deal with. So here's the second phrase. We talked about the vanity. Now here's the second phrase that's used in the book 28 times, I believe it is, in the book. I may have put on your sheet 27, actually 28. But anyway, 28 times it's used in the book, and there's 3 times where the phrase under heaven is used, which is essentially the same thing. Yeah, I've got 27 here. It's 28. At any rate, you can see how many times that's used. So under heaven or under the sun is the idea of drawing a line between heaven and earth and eliminating everything above the line. So basically we're looking at life without a spiritual eternity, without some gain in the future life. Now, actually, if we're all really honest with ourselves, that's a lot of way we lived until we came to grips with this concept and became a Christian, and that type of living still crowds into our life, still wants to get back in. Just like was some movie apparently did a bucket list and it got caught on, and everybody's talking about what's your bucket list? What do you want to accomplish before you die? What do you want to get done before you die? And if you don't get your bucket list done, wow, you really lost out. In spite of the fact that Psalm 16:10 says that in the presence of God there is pleasures forevermore and joy eternally. Whoa. I'm not running out of time. None of us are running out of time. And that is extremely important to understand. But if you're going to live life under the sun, and we do this with every teenager who goes to school. What do you want to do with your life? And I'm not saying it's a wrong question to ask. I'm just saying it triggers that. What are you going to do with your life? The great answer would be, I'm going to give my life to God. And what I'm going to do to try to make a living, okay, this is what I probably will do. Something like that. But I'm going to give my life to God. The number one golf player in the world right now is Scotty Scheffler. And he's a pleasure to watch play, but he's even more of a pleasure to listen to an interview that he gave a couple of days ago when the interviewer was just lauding him and saying, you're just amazing and all of this. And he kind of grinned and chuckled, and he says, well, really, I don't want to mess you guys up. I mean, I love golf, and I'm very competitive and all of that, and I happen to be really good at it. But what really matters to me is being a great husband and a great father to my children and my family. And I think in another interview he mentioned God, and he says that's really who I am. And he says, yeah, golf's great, it's a way to make a living, and I'm good at it. But what I really love is my wife and my family and my, and serving God. That's what I love. You just go, yay, team. Always makes you want to cry to see somebody, that popular and that good to whittle that back down. If I were talking to Scotty, I'd say, you read Ecclesiastes? He probably has, because that's where that would come from. So, but a very important phrase here in the book, and we need to keep that in mind as we look at the context of each of these. So it's going to always be in that. So it's just life as all men basically live it. We even if you said, yeah, I believe in God or anything, but how are you really living your life? You're basically, most people are just basically living it like, okay, what fun are we going to do next? What are we going to do next? What's going to happen? And we're looking to somehow develop the pleasure and joy of living in this life. Okay, 2 Corinthians 4:18 is a great parallel to this idea of under the sun. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. In fact, I think Chip has referenced this a number of times recently. He says, 2 Corinthians 4:18, I'll do 17, get those sentences. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. That's a statement of living differently than life under the sun. And then verse 18, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen, for the things that are seen are transient. The things that are unseen are eternal. See the word transient? There you are. That's the summation of life under the sun. The things that are seen, what we're seeing is transient. I was thinking about this. I preached in a sermon a year or two ago, at least 2 years ago. But as I was studying the sermon, I began to think, is there anything in this life that we do that isn't transient and doesn't just get old after a while? You ever notice that about, life? Goodness, there were things I did when I was younger, like, God, I just can't get enough of that. It's too much fun, And then I'm like, okay, well, it's not that important. And then, well, let me try something else. Oh, that's great. That's really too much fun. And then you take a vacation and you go, oh man, that was the greatest vacation. I'm going to take that next year. And next year it's not as good as last year. And that keeps happening. And I kept thinking, is there anything? And then I realized there was one thing. Yeah, there's one thing. You can't get enough of this, and you can't get enough of God, and He just gets better all the time. And he gets truly, the more you delve into, He gets addictive. He is an addictive person. You want to be around Him. You want to enjoy Him because He's the most loving, giving, caring individual that you've ever known in your life. And I weep for Christians who go their whole life and never get to know Him that deeply. But you're the only one who can do it. Chip.
One thing that Paul says there is love. Now, have faith, hope, and love.
Yeah.
Basically, is love. And what he's talking about that is the only thing that will survive this life.
That's right. Love. Wonderful. That's exactly right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah.
I'd say generational Christianity. When you see it through the children and their children, and it is the idea of something that endures beyond your death.
Yeah. When your children do follow it. Now, the preacher is going to say that doesn't always happen, and he's also going to say there's one of the things that's vanity under the sun, and it'll drive you nuts. And so there are certain things that are just that way, and it's really interesting to see that. So anyway, there's that transient nature. That's a very important picture in the book. So God's ways, of course, are the ways that are eternal and not transient. For example, when we get to chapter 2 and verse 26 or so, he's going to talk about 24, 25, and 26. He's going to talk about how joy and life and things are a gift from God. He goes, wait a minute, I'm going to go out and get it. You're not going to go out and get it. It isn't going to happen. It's a gift from God. And that is really, really important to understand. We think we can manipulate our lives and manipulate things in our lives to make it so it turns out good. And remember the chapter 3, it's going to talk about for everything there's a season. And if you don't know chapter 3, just turn on the Birds of the 60s and they'll sing it for you. But there's different stations and times in life, and there's a time to be born, and there's a time to die, and there's a time for war, and there's a time for peace, and you're not going to do a thing about it because it's going to happen. And everything in life goes that way. So those are the things we need to discover. Why is that? What is that? What's that supposed to teach us? But coming to grips with who's actually in control is going to be the main thing that we're going to get to. Questions, comments? Yeah.
When you live your life as God wants you to, it is addictive.
Yeah.
And it grows. The problem is there's people that you're doing it to, and they make it worse for you.
Yeah.
When you take the people out of it and you help people and you love people and you have joy, it just grows like a drug.
Yeah.
It grows and it amplifies.
Yeah.
When somebody stifles that by saying a cruel word or something, then you think it's God, but it's not. It's
Yeah.
just people.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's the under the sun life that in one degree we all live because of the transitory nature of good and bad, evil days and good days. Chapter 7, 13, and 14, he's going to say God has placed both so that you may not know what's going to happen after you. So there's good days and bad days. If you're having a good day, it's going to be just like the weather. Just give it a little chance and it'll turn around and go the other way. And the same thing with bad days. And we think, oh, the world's coming to an end. I'm having a bad day, and it's going to just last forever. It's like a season. It'll probably pass and go away. If it doesn't, it'll die, and then it'll have passed, and you'll go to a better place anyway. So one way or another, it's going to pass, and that's the way God has it, and that's what we want to learn from this. All right, so let's get down just a little more specific. We've talked the big picture and narrow it down here. You know, in the Hebrews, when the old Hebrew Bible was titled, they would title it after the first few words of the text. And so in this case, the preacher, and that's what Ecclesiastes means, is the Hebrew. Ecclesiastes is a Latin for the Hebrew word koheleth, which just means the preacher, or one who gathers an assembly to teach them. So he refers to himself as the preacher at the beginning of the book and the preacher at the end of the book. He mentions himself that way numerous times. The koheleth, the preacher. I remember. Most of you don't know Brother Homer Haley. Maybe you've remembered some of him, but I always loved Haley with his raspy voice. He'd say, Koheleth, and we gotta listen to Koheleth here, and then I got a kick out of that. But anyway, if you ever read his commentaries on that, it's interesting. All right, is Solomon the author? Everybody would say that's a no-brainer. I mean, obviously, he says right here in verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. You go down to verse 12, and he says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. And so the conclusion usually is that Solomon is the author. And if you read the first 2 chapters, does it sound like Solomon's the author? Absolutely, hands down. He's the richest man. He's done more than anybody else, etc., etc. And it's quite evident that Solomon is the author when you read the first 2 chapters. However, to quote Brother Haley, I don't think so. All right. So there's some hiccups into taking Solomon's theology. You say, well, what difference does it make? Well, for one thing, those who, I don't know if I have this up here. So the obvious references, Solomon chapter 1 through 223. After 223, you will not come close to seeing a hint of Solomon speaking. Not a hint of it. He will have vanished in the sermon. This is a sermon that he's giving. He will have just completely vanished. Solomon will not be anymore the topic. In fact, you will see the writer or the preacher complaining about all kinds of things that if he were Solomon, he could do something about it. There's leaders and high places that are worthless. There's, they're being trampled. The people are being oppressed. In fact, even speaks of being in a kingdom in which the motto is eat, drink, and be merry. It just goes on and becomes the opposite of Solomon and Solomon's days. So I'm keeping that. I want you to keep that in mind. Now, one of the problems of is this assumption. If Solomon wrote it, when did he write it? Well, when you read the first 2 chapters, it sounds like he's accomplished all these things. So the conclusion is he wrote it at the end of his reign, and he had repented. That's a pretty big assumption, isn't it? After we've been studying first and Second Kings, haven't we? And you get there in First Kings 11, and it doesn't sound like there's any repentance in that man at all. And in fact, then you go over to Nehemiah 12, where Nehemiah reminds the people of the life of Solomon, and he does not remind them well. He says even Solomon himself was led away by those women that he married, and those foreign women and stuff, and you shouldn't have been doing this. And he makes a strong implication that Solomon was lost his soul because of what he did. So that's a little hiccup there. Now, look, when I get done telling you this, you can believe Solomon wrote the letter if you want. I don't care. I'm just saying you want to be able to see the character of the book, and when you start looking at the character of the book, you're going to see things that are going to have a problem trying to match that to Solomon being the preacher and being the one who's writing these things. So the rest of the book indicates very dark days in Israel's history. It sounds a lot like the days of the Persian Empire. In fact, I'll probably put that down too here. There's complaints of corrupt leaders. There is a statement in chapter 7, verse 8. You want to take a look at that. Chapter 7 and verse 8 through 10. And he says, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. If this were Solomon's days, you read in 1 Kings 4:20 and 4:25 that during the days of Solomon, everybody lived in peace under his vine tree and under his fig tree, and they were able to eat and drink and be merry, and there was gold that was just everywhere, and silver was so common that it was like stones. It was like rocks just laying around. You don't get that implication at all. And why would anybody be saying, if they're living in the days of Solomon, man, the old days were so much better than today? Well, they weren't better than today. The old days, if you even went to David's reign, was war, 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 death, death, death. It was an awful period of time, and they were attacked by all kinds of people. They dealt with the Philistines, and just before David, you had Samuel, and that was a terrible reign. Then you had the judges before that, and that was awful period. So that's just a little, that's hard to imagine what is really being complained about there, and the preacher is warning them that's not going to do you any good. Always remind me of don't remember the name of the song or whatever, but I heard it in 1985. It was a song about how things were so much better 20 years ago. Now, I don't know how old that guy was. I'm not a music guy. I don't pay any attention to these people at all. But the whole song is about it's so much better 20 years ago. And I'm thinking, well, you must have been a teenager, or you must be a teenager not to know what 20 years before 1985 was. What was it, Kyle? 1965, and it was a mess, wasn't it? The 60s were, whoo!
That was Vietnam War too, right?
Yeah, Vietnam War was ramping up. I'm trying to keep my units up so I don't end up in a rice paddy in Vietnam. It's riots everywhere. It is awful. 20 years ago? Crazy.
Obviously, this is universal. We do that now, and it's not true now either.
Well, that's true too.
Refer to the 50s that way. No,
Yeah.
I was there, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It might, in any culture, you may have little pockets that were better at a particular time,
Sure.
but not life, and not generally, and not in this country, and not in any country.
Right. He should have written a song 30 years ago, saying how much better 30 years ago. I mean, that's happy days, right?
That's why
If you're living in happy
we
days.
refer to that, but they weren't.
Oh, but I lived in 1955. It was happy days. I mean, 1955, I was 7 years old. It was fantastic.
I think that conversation, though, sometimes we need to remember that that's actually one of the blessings of the Father.
Yeah.
Is that we remember the past with fondness.
We
just
do.
like
We do.
as parents, we generally tend to forget lots of the painful parts of parenting, and
Yes.
we thankfully remember all the reasons that we love our children, and
Yeah.
our parents remember the reasons that they love us, and not the reasons that they should have disowned us, but thankfully they didn't. That's part of like the innate forgiveness that God actually builds
Yeah.
within us.
Absolutely.
Remember the past in almost every case
Yeah.
better than everyone.
Yeah. Absolutely, Maura.
I get what you're saying, but he's quoting people saying, people have recency bias.
Yeah.
Just like the Israelites
Yeah.
did. They wanted to go back to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Oh, it's better for us to be slaves.
Right.
No, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
You're an idiot. Don't go back there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That infanticide is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we tend to do that a lot.
Yeah.
If we don't truly contemplate what former days were like.
Yeah, that very, very true, very true. And you have an excellent point there, and that's always something to consider. I mean, regardless of who wrote, that principle comes up in our lives all the time. Wayne?
I think the dark days in the church's history, the storm clouds were gathering in
Yeah.
the 50s after a return to
Yeah.
faith during the war.
Yeah.
And before that, the Reformation, the spread of the gospel in Kentucky, Tennessee, it was just crazy. And then we started seeing error coming
Yeah.
into the church. And if you think about it, the dark days in Israel's history, it was faith.
But if we started talking about morality and things like that, every generation would go. In fact, I read commentaries that go back to the 1700s, and they are literally saying, we are absolutely positive that the Lord is going to return here pretty soon, because there's no way it could be any worse than God's going to just have to do something. And every generation ends up saying that. Mike.
Well, maybe just a counterpoint to the dark days that was history. At the end of Solomon's life, I think God raises up adversaries against him.
Yes.
Hadad, Edomite,
True.
people like that. So perhaps he's looking back on father days.
Just-
at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that was a real brief period at the end, relatively speaking, but yes, that began to happen there in his last days, Chip.
Yeah, consistent with that is the context of those verses that you're citing there. He's talking about the end being better than the
Yeah.
being better than
So don't.
the former law at the end. And to
Yeah.
consistency with Ecclesiastes, look beyond
Yeah, look.
the moment you're in.
Yeah,
Don't dwell in the past.
absolutely.
Dwell in the present.
Yeah.
Look beyond.
Yeah, you haven't come to the completion yet, and that, we as Christians need to look at that as well. It's bad, whatever you're going through, but it isn't the end of the world. So those are just some things that are brought up. I've mentioned this before, no indication the preacher has influence or power to change some of the things that if he were king, he would be actually responsible for changing, like the corrupt leaders and things like
So
that.
you're saying it might be another son of David, or?
Okay, I'm going to get to that. Just one second. So, book never mentions Solomon by name as is listed in Proverbs. These are the arguments that are made against it. Okay. The book never mentions Solomon by name as in Proverbs and as in Song of Solomon, where you have his actual name being used. You then here, look at 1:16. He says, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience in wisdom and knowledge. Who was over Jerusalem before Solomon? David. That's it. He speaks as if there was a great lineage of kings, and he has accomplished more than any of the others. So that's kind of an interesting statement. Chapter 2, verse 7 also. I bought male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house, and had also great possessions, herds, and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. Down in verse 9, so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Now, that sounds exactly like Solomon, no doubt. On the other hand, it's interesting how that's phrased before anybody else before me in Jerusalem. Well, you're the second king. Second good king. The third king altogether, Saul, David, and then Solomon. So it's not only you have a great history here. So the question then that comes up is, did a later wise preacher deal with the former days desire and the idea of how to maybe accomplish things and what this life is about by initially just presenting himself in the garb of Solomon and laying that out as a foundation, and then turning around and saying, even Solomon didn't attain to what you think. Now, I will say this, and I think this is an absolute surety of the character of the book. He's dealing with people who are like the days of Nehemiah and like the days of Malachi. I think I probably put that down as well. Where materialism is a very, very strong part of their heart. They are disappointed that wicked people are riding on horses and righteous people are walking on the ground like slaves. There is an upside down culture and they don't understand. That's just what they did in Malachi. Same thing. Doesn't do any good to do good because God favors the wicked. You know, they're the ones who are rich. Kind of like the psalm that we did, Psalm 73, same kind of thing. So there is that flavor all the way through the book. And I would say regardless of who writes the book, the key is that materialism is not going to get you anywhere. And you are not going to succeed by thinking that if you are wealthy and if I just had this and if I just had that, or if this just happened, or if I got that job, all would be solved and all would be better. So however you look at the author, that's the idea, and those are the two viewpoints that are given.
So do some people think that it's post-exilic then?
Yes. Those who would say it's not Solomon. In fact, Hebrew scholars will even say, and there's a number of commentaries that cite this, but Hebrew scholars even say the Hebrew that's used in Ecclesiastes is late in nature and does not fit the Hebrew that would be in the 9th century or something like that. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions on that? Don't need to dwell on a long time, but just wanted to give you that picture.
Would it be appropriate, though, for someone to say that they had gathered more wisdom than any before them in Jerusalem?
Yeah.
When Solomon was in Jerusalem, there was no one wiser.
Yeah.
So how would someone be able to say that, actually?
Yeah. And their argument is that, as I just put here, that they almost, I guess what you would say, impersonated Solomon and put themselves, it's just like, if you were reading ASV, King James, New King James, American Standard there, verse 12 says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. It's a past tense. And the argument is, I just read this last night even more in a different commentary, the argument is that he's giving obvious hints that that's who he is. And if he's present talking to the people, obviously they would look at him and know he's not Solomon, but it would be a very obvious thing as he's saying these things. Let me show you what it was like to be king. If you're thinking of those former days and you think you're going to attain so much if you were wealthy, I'm going to give you the example of the greatest of the greatest of the greatest, and he couldn't do it in life under the sun. And again, regardless of who writes it, that's the lesson, isn't it? That's really the point. If it's not Solomon, then he's using Solomon. If it is Solomon, he's using himself, saying, "Hey, this is where this goes." The one thing I really have a hard time with is thinking that this is Solomon writing this after he repented, when there's just absolutely no evidence of that. If he did write it after he repented, why didn't you say so in the book? Why didn't you say so that? I'll tell you. But you know what the writer never does? He never says, I was living in sin and I did all of this. He never mentions living a life of sin and that was really stupid and I'm going to... He's not talking about living a life of sin. I mean, there's certain sinful things like being a fool and things like that. But he's really not talking about that. He's talking about living a life of luxury and pursuing wealth and pursuing possessions and attaining and all of that. That's what he's really talking about, trying to get his people not to get their eyes off of that. Of Quit thinking that somehow, you're going to get the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And that's going to make some kind of difference in your life. And that, again, regardless of the author, is the message. And that's what we got to get. Okay, anybody? Yeah. All right. That was only supposed to take 15 minutes. The biggest flaw this preacher has is trying to figure out how long something's going to take. So that's the idea. So here's just a quick basic outline. You have a prologue in chapter 1 through 11, which is the foundation of transience and vanity. You have illustrations of all things transient or breath-like in chapter 1 through 6. And then chapter 7 through 12 is wisdom, how to live life in wisdom in light of all things vanity or all things transient. So that's basically the idea. I would say verse 3 of chapter 1 is the key verse. He asks the question, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? What does he gain? What's the end result? Well, other versions, what does he profit? When it's all said and done, the Hebrew there is the idea of what's left over, what remains.
Something on your tombstone.
Something on your tombstone. That's exactly right. Something on your tombstone is what remains. Which I wish you hadn't said that. I go out to see hadn't seen my father's tombstone. Been out at his grave in over 50 years since a month after he died. And I went out because I thought, well, I want to see, Mom's supposed to be laid next to him. So I go out, here's Dad's. I go back in, is Mom laid next to Dad? Yeah. Well, that's interesting, there's no tombstone.
You didn't buy one.
No. Oh, no, it was paid for. Mom, I'll never forget Mom and Dad paying payments. Because they were so poor, paying payments because they knew Dad would die pretty soon. They paid payments to make sure they had both that gravesite. Well, of course, the director wasn't there, and he's supposed to call me, and I keep calling them, and they got getting back to me. So I said, "Is she really there?" That's the next question. So anyway, there you go. Just add that to transience and life under the sun, and who knows? But when it's all said and done. Yeah, that's what's left. So what does a man gain? What does a man profit from all those things under the sun? So there is our picture. Okay. That leaves us nice 5 minutes. All right, we're going to do this then. So and the sheet you have will give you a good homework ready for detailed discussion next week. So I'm going to read 1 through 11 together. And as we read it, I want you to come up with one conclusion that would summarize these verses. One conclusion would summarize these verses. Okay? Here we go. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Sorry. All right. I didn't do that. Yeah, I closed the book. I'm sure they've told me not to do that. They've told me not to close my. How does that?
It's Apple TV. It's Apple TV.
That's why I don't subscribe to Apple TV.
Never seen you so red.
They have warned me over and again. Don't close the computer too quickly. Sorry. Well, that's a lesson I should learn right there. Shoo-wee. Okay, everybody do this. Delete, 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 delete. Quick, delete. Yikes. Okay. I don't know if I'm going to survive that one. Verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher.
This will come up.
Yeah, that's right. Elders meeting this afternoon. Teresa always asks me the question after every elders meeting, did they fire you? This time I can say, yeah, I put nasty stuff on the screen. I'm sorry. Okay, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing in which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. All right, when you read that, can you give a very, very brief summation, like one sentence or a phrase or word or whatever, that would summarize what life under the sun is? Yes, Brian.
No matter what I do, I can't change it.
Okay, good. That's a good way. No matter what man does, nothing seems to change. Good.
Or whatever I try to learn and understand, it's always the same.
Yeah, good. You get back to the same result. Okay, great.
I call it like an empty cycle. It's seemingly going somewhere, but then it goes nowhere.
Yeah, it's a mouse on one of those in a cage. He just keeps going. We call it the rat race and all that, and it just keeps repeating. Yeah, Lori. What's the point? Yeah, good. That's a good solution. You read that and you go, well, what's the point? And that's probably the best question that the preacher wants us to ask. When you get there, you go, well, what is the point? Yes, that's what he wants to point you to. There is a point. But if you live incorrectly, there isn't a point.
This sadly is also a conclusion
That people what?
because it's suicide.
Yeah, well, that's the conclusion of why some people commit suicide. It's like they get to the point where they don't see any use in living anymore. They don't see that there's a great end. Good. Those are good ways to summarize. It is. Would you also say, and he's going to use this word, what a weariness. What a weariness it is. So that's why some people read this and go, wow, Solomon, he needs some antidepressants. He's really down in the dumps, and he's looking at this, and he's just saying, boy, life just stinks. And by the time you get to 223, you're going to think, well, life does just stink. It really does, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just going to keep on going the same way. Well, and this is one reason, by the way, I've always thought that. And I do this a lot of times, depending on who I'm teaching. But a lot of times, the very first text that I use with somebody who I know isn't religious, is questioning where they ought to go in their life. Ecclesiastes is a great place to start because it shows them where they can have purpose and that what they're living right now is going to be nothing but a weariness if they don't make a change. Okay, so. That's real good. Any other final comments? All right, very good. So that's what we'll plan on next week, Lord willing. And thank you for your great comments. And don't close the computer too quickly.